In 2025, let's troll Kansas and celebrate Missouri history simultaneously.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And, well, speaking of those two sports, I'll update you with the latest in the portal later in the program, including why I feel a little bit bad for Bo Pribula on some level. But I do want to remind you quickly, this episode is brought to you by the Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K. Turn any TV into your Xbox. No console needed. Head to amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to learn more. And what I want to start with today is what I believe to be, well, this is easy for me to say. I'm going to break my arm patting myself on the back here. I think this is the greatest troll job, what I'm about to lay out in the history of Missouri football. And you know what? I think I just got Eli Drinkwitz's attention, who is a noted troll of his opponents, especially some of his rival coaches, without a doubt. So here is my suggestion. I think we should put national champions 1960 on the press box at Faurot Field. Now, don't get me wrong, that in and of itself is not an original idea. There have been a lot of Missouri fans over the years who would like the athletic department to officially stake their claim to the 1960 national championship. And I'll go into a little bit of the history of why that is here in a second. But here's my twist on the whole thing. It's all about timing. I think Missouri should put that on the press box, cover it up with some type of black banner or whatever, silver banner to make it even more cloak and dagger perhaps. But the point is, I want that to be revealed like maybe 15 minutes before kickoff. Remember when Jeremy Macklin got surprised with his name on the wall? What an emotional experience that was for him. Well, imagine if you do that right before the kickoff of the first Missouri-Kansas football game in I believe 14 years it'll be this fall. First of all, the Kansas people on the sidelines will mostly be confused. Now, sure, some of the fans in the stands will obviously get it, who made the travel over across the eastern part of the plains here. But as far as the players on the field, well, they're going to be confused. The Kansas Jayhawks players are going to have no idea what's going on. In fact, most of them obviously are not even from the state of Kansas. They don't know the history of all this. But if you gave them a week or two or a month or a few months, say you did it this summer, well, that would give Kansas months of bulletin board material. And if you're a Bob Stoops type of coach, well, you're going to grab onto that with both of your hands around its neck without a doubt. And I wouldn't blame Lance Leopold, the Kansas coach, for doing that. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to give him that opportunity if I'm Eli Drinkwitz in the Missouri Athletic Department. That's why we're going to do the reveal right before kickoff. Because you know who is going to know all the history of that? Yes, not everybody on the Missouri sidelines necessarily is going to know that leading into it or right as I'm speaking. But guess who can let him in on it? Eli Drinkwitz and everybody else. Gary Pinkel, the man who wrote the book Respectable Roughnecks, for example, about the 1960 Tigers. They can let them know about the history of how Missouri went undefeated technically, but also sort of lost it. Well, I shouldn't even say, I don't know what the right word is here other than technically, but the final score of the Missouri-Kansas game that year was Kansas 23, Missouri 7. But Kansas used an ineligible player. Most of you probably know this history. But the point is, bottom line, in the record books, Missouri goes down as undefeated. However, that whole ruling and the results of the bowl system, at least in the AP and UPI polls at the time, well, those final polls were done before the bowl games. Minnesota was number 1 in both of those polls, by the way, though they finished 8-2 after losing their bowl game. So had there been another selection, another vote, as there was in many other aspects of national championship selection, it wasn't just the polls back in 1960, by the way. There were many other, including the polling system, the interestingly, coincidentally, I suppose, named after Richard R. Polling, who his system was, by the NCAA's admission, a major selector of national champions for about 50 years, from 35 to 1984. Well, Alabama, for instance, during this time, and actually even retroactively to that, for 4 of their national championships in 25, 26, 30, and 34, well, they're claiming it. They're claiming all of those. Those are up in Bryant-Denny Stadium right now. So this is not an Alabama history lesson. The point here is this is not without precedent. And in fact, Minnesota and Ole Miss, I mentioned Minnesota from 1960. Well, Ole Miss also claims the 1960 national champions based on several other selectors, including the Football Writers Association of America. So there is some actual legitimacy to claiming the 1960 championship on a bajillion different levels, to be honest with you. And by the way, the Jayhawks themselves, if they object to this, well, they have banners hanging in Allen Fieldhouse in basketball for 1922 and 1923. Guess what? There wasn't an NCAA tournament nor an NIT tournament. There was nothing even remotely approaching a national championship. And yet 20 years later, the Helms Foundation retroactively awarded Kansas a couple of national championships, and that was good enough for them to hang a couple banners in Allen Fieldhouse. I would point out that Helms, the man who founded this foundation, was born, wait for it, in Ottawa, Kansas, to the surprise of absolutely no one. But more than 50 years later, by the way, another competing outlet for the Helms retroactive titles was the Primo and Peretta Power Poll. Well, they said Army was the national champion of 1923, remember, previously claimed by Kansas. And guess who was Primo and Peretto's 1922 national champion? Wait for it. Yes, none other than your Missouri Tigers. So if you want to start hanging some banners in Mizzou Arena for some national championships from the 1920s as well, I'm all about it. I really am. If it's going to troll Kansas and make them angry so we have competing banners hanging in our respective arenas, frankly, nothing would make me happier than that. But again, back to the strategic part of this. I really think that, of course, not only can Missouri and Eli Drinkwitz let the players let them in on the secret here, but you don't even have to let the fans know in on the secret. You just rip that banner down and go, hey, fans, we got a special presentation for you. I'm telling you, people at Missouri will lose their freaking minds. That will give Missouri, already in a game that the crowd is going to be electric for at kickoff. There's no question. Why not juice it up another 10, 20, 30%? That sounds like a good plan to me. And again, if it makes the Kansas fans, our absolute arch rivals, angry, well, good. They're going to be angry after the game, which is what we want. We don't want to rile them up before the game. Heck, even play it up. Act like this is a real respectable rivalry. So glad that you guys agreed to play us again, only to pull the rug off of the side of the press box to just ram it right down their throats. I mean, come on. Is that not a brilliant idea or what? Somebody tell me the downside of this. I've thought of it from a million different angles. Strategically, it's a win. Trolling, it's a win. And by the way, in terms of legitimacy, well, if you want to tell Alabama to rip down their banners and Kansas to rip down their banners in Allen Fieldhouse too, hey, that'll be fine by me. Then at least we'll all be on an even footing. And what is next in the transfer portal for both Eli Drinkwitz and Dennis Gates? Let's talk about that. in just a little bit, and why I do feel a tiny bit bad for Bo Pribula's previous situation. All that in a minute. But first, there really is nothing like the atmosphere of an NBA playoff game. And imagine being able to see that in person, seeing a LeBron James and Dante DiVincenzo collide and trying to figure out how, even though LeBron outweighs him by 65 pounds, that he's the one who hits the floor in pain. That's just something you got to see in person. And when you do, you got to use Gametime, the fast and easy way to get playoff tickets, even when demand is high. We're talking last-minute deals, saving you up to 60% off buying last minute for, again, sports, concerts, comedy, theater, the whole deal, and all-in pricing means no surprises. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. If you're an everyday listener of the program, well, thanks as always, first of all. But secondly, you know that basketball-wise, in the portal, I think the Tigers need at least one, if not two more guys who can really shoot the basketball to round out these final two spots on the Tiger roster. Well, according to a lot of recruiting people out there, including Power Mizzou, the Tigers are in on at least one more shooter. So it sounds like Dennis Gates does agree with me. And, well, we do tend to see the game offensively through a very similar prisms, although spectrums, prisms, I don't know what the right analogy is there. But regardless, I do agree with most of Dennis Gates' offensive stuff. I kind of laugh when people nitpick that a little bit. Don't get me wrong. Against Drake, we left a lot to be desired. The game plan, everything. You want to put that one on Dennis Gates? I'm with you. I'm just saying defensively, well, that is where I tend to see the game maybe slightly differently than Coach Gates. But at football-wise in the portal, I'd say at this point, it's really mostly about just depth pieces on the gridiron. I think you're just looking for more competition, probably on the interior defensive line, definitely at the tackle positions on the offensive line too. I think biggest questions on the team right now, on the outside of the offensive line, on that side of the football, defensively, it's on the very outside, the boundaries, the cornerback position. If Missouri is good at tackle and corner, and of course quarterback as well, that's sort of the obvious one, but those two positions in particular, if they can be good there, well, that's going to make everybody's life, including Bo Pribula's, so much easier. And again, assuming Bo Pribula is your quarterback, I don't want to assume too much at this point. But speaking of Pribula, I have to say I do feel bad for the guy a little bit. Based on his previous stop at Penn State, I don't feel bad for him currently per se, but just he was put in an impossible situation at Penn State. He really was. Initially, well, he was kind of the poster boy for, these kids just don't care about their team, that kind of deal. When Pribula, the Nittany Lions backup quarterback, excuse me, had found himself, well, without really a path to being a starter anytime soon. Drew Aller's going to be coming back next year, your entrenched starter in Happy Valley. Well, here's the thing, though. James Franklin did not blame Pribula for leaving the Nittany Lions before the college football playoff because, again, if the portal window is going to open before the playoff starts, well, then how is that fair to put the kids in the playoff at a disadvantage, especially somebody like Pribula, who's not – it's not as though he's Nico Iamaleava holding teams hostage in the spring or anything like that. The guy simply wants to go find a place to play football. I can't really blame anybody for that under any circumstances, whether they're coming or going from my favorite team. I mean, really, put yourself in Bo Pribula's shoes. If you're one of those people who thinks, well, you should be out there for the team in that situation, I agree with you. I'm sure Bo Pribula felt like he was letting his team down by leaving. But at the same time, if he had stuck around and then watched all these other quarterbacks, leave, maybe he would have been left in the lurch, maybe with a much lesser starting quarterback opportunity than being the starting quarterback at Missouri, an SEC team that's won double-digit games each of the past 2 seasons. And hey, $1.5 million reportedly in NIL value. That ain't so bad either. And if he delays that, who's to know if that amount of money, that opportunity, maybe even more importantly to him, is still there. But let's not turn our noses at the money either. It's really easy for fans to say, oh, well, this money, that money, the other, especially in a world where this is the first big money that Bo Prabula is ever going to make in his life. Heck, it may be the biggest payday he's ever going to see in his entire life. So to me, he was put in an impossible situation to where he had to basically choose between himself and his team. I just think that was unfair because in a much more sane world, well, the portal wouldn't open until after the college football playoff, and then all of these players would be on an equal footing. I don't see what would be the downside of that particular change in the calendar, the rule book, and the format. So I was talking some football yesterday with former Mizzou cornerback Clayton Baker. He and I like to chop it up and talk some ball on occasion over the phone. And we were talking about Luther Burden and his landing spot with the Chicago Bears. I was saying, hey, I like all of the potential skill guys around and including Burden on this Bears offense, but I wasn't really sure about the offensive line. I just literally do not know. Not so much I'm questioning it. I just didn't know, to be honest with you, about the Bears offensive line was my point. And I thought Clayton had a really good point, which is he said, especially with Caleb Williams last season, a rookie quarterback, well, evaluating offensive line play, especially, well, pass protection specifically, is a really difficult chore. And I thought that was an excellent point. And I think it does I think it does relate to Bo Prabula for Missouri a little bit. Not a rookie per se, not a true freshman, of course, at the college level, but a guy with relatively little college experience. That's one thing. Another reason why I think Missouri should be a little bit more run heavy, because when you have a guy like Prabula, not only is he fairly inexperienced, he's a guy who trusts his legs too. And at times, if you trust your legs a little more than your pocket presence, well, that can make it tough on your offensive linemen. They don't know exactly where they need to block in protection. Now, the good news for Prabula is in a little bit I saw of him, especially in big moments against Wisconsin, that 1 second half he played, an important moment for the Nittany Lions last year. I thought he hung in the pocket pretty well and showed good pocket presence and a willingness to hang in there and let the play develop, while also being a very willing and physical runner. So I think he's an interesting prospect. It's just, you just wonder about the continuity, not only between him and his receivers, but the offensive line too. And also, Missouri getting an official visit from a top 10 national forward. So high school recruiting not dead just yet for Dennis Gates and company, though some changes are probably coming here pretty soon. Plus, Gates hires a new assistant coach to replace C.Y. Young. I'll tell you about that in just a little bit. But first, the NBA playoffs are almost here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. When you join FanDuel, place your first $5 bet, and you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. From three-pointers to steals to assists, FanDuel has so many different ways to bet on your favorite player props. So don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. And according to Brandon Jenkins over at 24/7 Sports, Tony Bryant, who is 24/7's 10th ranked player in the 2026 class, going to take an official visit to Missouri on September 6th, which is quite a ways away, but notably, well, if Missouri takes my advice, Brandon Jenkins will be there against the Jayhawks to see the 1960 championship reveal on the press box at Memorial Stadium. So obviously a smart date there to bring that young man in. I don't know how much of a chance Missouri really has here, to be honest, based on the fact that, well, the guy's taking a whole lot of visits, that's for sure. Kansas may well be the biggest competition here for the Florida-based product, but I don't really know what's up with this young man. I'll just say an official visit, well, that tells you you've at least got a puncher's chance. And a lot of people, of course, with the transfer portal right now are asking an understandable question, especially after, well, a lot of guys like Williams Winery, for example, Kewan Lacey, Courtney Crutchfield on the basketball side, maybe even more to the point, well, you had Marcus Allen and Peyton Marshall move on in the transfer portal, part of Missouri's 5-man freshman class this past season. Well, I think the reason you still recruit high school guys is to get the hopefully immediate guys like Donovan Olubade on the football side at receiver, or perhaps somebody like Tony Bryant if Missouri were to get his services here in a couple seasons. But I do think, though, even though obviously Eli Drinkwitz and Dennis Gates are still going to recruit the high school ranks, I think what you're going to see and what you've already seen is that those classes just continue to shrink a little bit. Like, I don't think you're going to see a 5-man class from Dennis Gates ever again. Much more likely a couple guys from high school, I think, in every class seems more like a reasonable number, which is what Missouri has for this upcoming season in Nicholas Randall and Aaron Rowe. And by the way, speaking of Dennis Gates, he did fill out his assistant coach vacancy there with C.Y. Young back to his hometown of Miami, Florida. Well, I have to say, one thing about Steve Wright that I liked immediately is that I noticed that when I started this podcast all the way back in 2019, Steve Wright was a video coordinator at Cleveland State. So the man, like myself, has come a long way back when Locked On hired me and I wasn't even getting 100 listens per show. We've come a long way, baby. But I'll just say, for all the people out there who are maybe hoping for a more seasoned assistant coach and X's and O's guy, if you will, well, first of all, I would say who is that guy? Because if there's an assistant who brings massive value defensively, for example, hey, that's great. Let's go find him. But great college coaches, head coaches, I should say, do strange X's and O's things all the time, mostly because they continue to play their style. And I'll emphasize their style almost no matter what the circumstances are. So to the people who are saying, hey, Gates needs an X's and O's guy for offense, I just simply don't agree with that. Again, even though the Drake game was bad, I disagreed with so much of what Missouri did strategically in that game. So I'm not saying Gates is beyond reproach here, but I do think focusing on the offensive side is missing the point, which is, well, the defensive side of the ball for Missouri is been the problem all 3 years for the Tigers. It had gotten a lot better this past season until it didn't for the past, say, 4 or 5 weeks or so, and the Tigers defense just fell off a cliff. So, again, let's not overanalyze assistant coaches here when, to Drew King's point this morning in the Kings court over at Power Mizzou, he said rhetorically, like, how many assistant basketball coaches in the SEC can you even name? I got Frank Haith. That was the one I got there, which is the assistant over at Texas there, the ultimate exception that proves the rule. But regardless, hey, hope you've had fun listening to Locked On Mizzou today. And for your second listen, you got to check out The Portal Show. Brian Smith, my guy who was on the previous episode. Yeah, we kind of did a little simulcast, I guess you could say, of Locked On Mizzou and The Portal. You got to be informed on the rapid changes in the college football landscape, and Brian is just the guy for it. Find The Portal on YouTube or wherever you find podcasts. So until next time, I'm John Miller. This has been Locked on Mizzou.